Hello, everyone, and welcome to Film Fiends, the podcast where we talk about all things related to horror films. My name's Alex.
And I'm Bryant.
I'd like to thank you all for joining us for our very first episode, which, if everything goes to plan, should be releasing on Halloween.
Exactly. That was kind of our impetus. That's kind of what's been driving us. That's been the little goal.
Yep.
We got to have a little bit of the Halloween spirit.
Exactly. Halloween 2020, looking a little bit different than other years, but we still want to bring some festivity to you guys and celebrate a little bit in our own way as well.
Exactly. I mean, there's so many Halloween things. Like, we've talked about scary movies, talk about the jack-o'-lantern. It's like, come on. Yeah, those things aren't going anywhere.
And in fact, we're going to be getting to that a little bit later as well. Actually closing up the podcast with some talk about Halloween traditions and things that we like to do on this very fun night. But first, I'd like to start by explaining a little bit to you all what Film Fiends is all about. So like I said, we are a podcast. We're going to be talking primarily about horror movies. We're going to be delving into kind of the culture that surrounds horror, different genres, themes that pervade the genre, things like that. So we will do a little bit of like movie to movie reviews as well. But a lot of the times we're going to be trying to delve into kind of a specific topic. To give you an example, today's topic is going to be what makes a horror movie good. Kind of a big thing to unpack there.
Yeah, no kidding. That's kind of... that kind of gets at the heart of all of it. I mean, Jesus, you read any horror movie review and you kind of have to say your rules about what you're looking for in the first place.
Yep.
Before you can talk about what it's even, whether it's even any good.
Absolutely. Especially when we're talking about horror movie reviews. I think we just recently stumbled upon one that started with, I don't like horror movies.
Exactly.
So that's a little bit tough. Part of the goal of starting with what makes a horror movie good is to give you guys a little bit of an idea of our preferences, the things that we enjoy in movies, and so we can kind of just build on that as you all listen to our various topics. So hopefully you'll get a good idea of like what kind of viewers we are as well.
Exactly. It's not going to do any good to just say a bunch of opinions if you have no framework for exactly what we're looking for.
Right.
Everyone's their own kind of viewer, especially with horror movies. You can find that there's a lot of different things people can be looking for.
Also, a lot of people that just will straight up say, I don't like horror movies, which makes it an even more divisive genre.
Exactly. I actually kind of can't wait for that to be a topic later on.
Oh, doing a little spoiler here. Spoiler alert.
That might be one we're going to talk about later. People that say they don't like horror movies, but I think we're both in agreement that everybody has something that can be defined as horror. That they're
Stranger Things.
Yeah, exactly.
Perfect.
The most successful Netflix show.
Right, yeah, exactly. It is horror, folks. Don't get it twisted. It's not blood and guts, but it's definitely spooky.
Exactly.
All right. So with that established, we wanted to real quick give you a little bit of info about ourselves as well. So like I said, my name is Alex. Co-host here is Bryant. We've known each other for, about 6 years now?
Gosh, yeah, I guess
Something
it has
like
been that long, yeah.
That long, yeah.
Absolutely.
We initially bonded over the fact that not only are we both big horror fans, but we're both horror writers as well. Around that time, we had both been working on some short stories, had some things in the backlog, and so we swapped stories with each other and gave each other some feedback, and I mean, one thing led to another, and nowadays, whenever I have a project, especially a horror project, I'm almost always talking to Bryant about it, getting some feedback, doing some edits, that kind of thing.
Exactly. No, whenever I get something written out, finally, Alex is always the first person I hit up to kind of take a look at what I've done. Sometimes, because we do have the similarities, but also because we do have our differences in audience kind of taste, which is going to be kind of great for this podcast too. And it's why I appreciate his feedback, because he is not me.
Yes, yes. Don't you worry, dear audience. You will soon come to understand the differences between Bryant and I, because, like he said, we have a lot of similarities. We're very good friends, but it's funny the things that we can get divisive on. So yeah, we had tried to, for a while, come up with some sort of project that we could collaborate on. But something that made it difficult was that we have very similar skill sets. We're both writers. He does a bit more cinematography than I do.
Sure.
That kind of thing. But when we would talk about working on things together, it would be like, well, are we going to co-author a script or a novel? We both like comics as well, so that's kind of been in the talks. But it was difficult to find something where we weren't stepping on each other's toes. So just recently, we had come up with the idea of, okay, well, what about a podcast? Basically, all we have to do is talk about something that we both love. So here we are.
Exactly. No, Alex had mentioned the idea a couple weeks back, and I just immediately started doing research and
Right, yeah.
yeah, watching horror movies.
Yep,
Realized
yep.
that boy, if that's what you're asking me to do, I can do that.
Yes, and
So-
let me just say I definitely appreciate that level of commitment that you have. I think that also probably will become apparent in terms of the amount of preparation that's gone into this. Bryant has got a big notebook in front of him full of notes, and I have like my phone with a note app open, and you know I think that we'll both have a lot to contribute to the discussion. Excuse me. So yeah, we're
Oh
excited
yeah,
to
no,
have you.
no, definitely. I mean, you did the vast majority of the actual legwork. I sat on the couch and thought deep thoughts. So that's
I mean, what other legwork is there for a podcast?
sure.
Let's be honest here.
Exactly.
Thinking deep thoughts. Alrighty, so we're gonna go ahead and move on to our main topic, which, as I mentioned before, is what makes a horror movie good.
Yep.
Very big topic to unpack. We're gonna do our best to get through it. At a brisk pace, you know, we're not gonna. I say that because we could sit here and talk about this for probably upwards of 6 hours if we wanted to.
Oh, sure, absolutely.
But we're gonna condense that into something that is still entertaining for you guys and kind of gets to our point a little bit faster than us just, you know, rambling, having a beer in the garage, which is definitely how this podcast came to be.
Exactly.
So we're gonna start off with defining a horror movie. In order to tell you all what we think makes a horror movie good, we have to tell you what we think makes a horror movie. So I'm going to go ahead and start off here. And with each of the topics, I'm going to go ahead and lead and then probably let Bryant take it from there. But for me, there's kind of a couple of big pillars that make something, in my mind, a horror movie. The first being that it has to be trying to scare me. To put this in a slightly different way, we often talk about film as emotion. And when you might have the action film as wanting to excite you, the romance film wanting you to feel love, the tragedy, of course, wanting you to feel sad, horror is a very pure genre to me in the sense that if it is a horror movie, it should be about fear. And what that means for me as a viewer is that it needs to be trying to scare me. So that's one of probably my biggest, actually, pillar for what makes a movie a horror movie for me. The next one being that for it to fall cleanly into a horror movie, it has to have some kind of horror aesthetic or imagery to it. And this relies a little bit on the tropes of the genre, which means that it's a little bit like cyclical. It's a little bit eating its own tail in that sense. But it doesn't necessarily have to be blood and guts or ghosts. It just has to be showing me something that unnerves me or scares me or creeps me out or freaks me out in some way. That has to be present in the imagery as well.
Oh, absolutely. No, it's probably the most identifiable aspect and kind of what people look for. I mean, if you look about why genres exist, it's so that the studios can kind of give people recognizable things. It's that you're kind of selling somebody that fear experience. It's what people are signing up for.
Absolutely.
So that definitely defines the genre because that's
Yep.
that experience that you're trying to sell. That's, you know,
Yep.
why Hollywood makes things in genres.
Exactly. And that might sound like a short list from me, but as you'll learn when I talk more and more about horror movies, they're really, really important. I'm going to give you a big example here of something that should probably be classified as a horror movie, but for me did not work as a horror movie, and that's Midsummer. It has a lot of imagery and a lot of aesthetic that is scary. And on some level, I think that there is an element of fear present, but the core of the movie, I think, is not trying to scare you. And it ended up being a little bit of a misfire for me because of that. And that's kind of a whole other discussion. My understanding is that Ari Aster went through a really bad breakup while making the film and had decided to kind of shift the focus away from being his take on kind of like a slasher to more of his take on a breakup film. And I feel like that is really apparent in the final cut. Sorry, I actually mean theatrical cut. I have not seen the director's cut. That's like way longer. So I'm
Oh,
not
that's
sure
right.
if-
That exists.
I know we need to. We need to get
I've
on
been
it.
meaning. I actually just rewatched Midsummer a month or two ago.
We need to get on
Are you
that.
ready for the third disagreement? I think Midsummer is brilliant.
Yes, it's a brilliant film. Don't get me wrong, it really is. But I wanted to bring that up because I think it really illustrates how strict those pillars are for me. They have to really fit into those two categories for me to say, yes, this is a horror movie. And straying from them in one way or the other is going to have me raising some eyebrows. So if you were to talk with me in a casual conversation and mention Midsummer as a horror movie, I wouldn't argue with you on it. But just for the sake of trying to make these definitions as thorough as possible, that's kind of where it lands for me.
Yeah, exactly. No, that was really the challenge, especially when you're talking about genres and anything on the weird fiction scale of the sci-fi fantasy horror can be really difficult to disentangle at times.
Where do you draw the lines?
And that for me was what stuck with me the most. I felt like I got down this endless rabbit hole on how do you define genre when I started to try to differentiate between thriller and horror.
Right.
Because
right.
I feel like there is this line in your head of when one's doing one thing and when's the other, but
it's true. They're
coming
very
up
close.
with a concrete definition is actually really, really difficult.
It is.
It took me some time.
Yes.
But
so it's definitely less. I'm coming up with less of a thesis definition on my side and more of a set of principles that I think a movie has to follow in order to fall into the genre. But yeah, I think that's actually that's me. If you want to take it from there.
Sure, I think I did come up with a little more of a thesis. But we'll get there.
All right. Well,
pardon this little lecture coming up. But
we're going on Bryant's journey, folks.
Exactly.
Oh, crack open your beer. It's time.
But yeah, no. Before I want to define horror genre, I kind of want to define genre in and of itself.
Wow. Okay.
How do you tell when something is kind of a distinct genre of its own and not just kind of a collection of elements that are repeated? As much as these repeated elements can define genres, like you look at westerns and it's got cowboys and horses and outlaws,
Sure.
and the way that horror movies have spooky cabins in the woods and psycho killers and
Absolutely.
ghosts and final girls and
Hey, but spooky cabins in the woods and psycho killers could also be No Country for Old Men. I'm just saying.
that's true. Looking, I think a more academic study would call those elements a semantic definition of genre.
Okay.
Where you have a big list of things that you would find in those movies. There's elements or attitudes, locations, characters, these kinds of repeated elements that are recognizable. And then the other side of that would be a more syntactical definition of genre, where you take all of those elements and it's about what do those add up to? What do we make those narratives into? What is the kind of the larger point of those? So you can kind of look at genre from those two opposing points of view. And it's not like one's right and the other's wrong. It's actually, for each question that comes up, you can kind of look at it two different ways and kind of find, almost two different answers. For a lot of kind of splitting hairs. It kind of depends on how you're looking at it.
And I have one guess as to probably what's coming up. And my guess is that the best horror movies probably do really well at both.
Oh yeah, absolutely. No, that's kind of the thing with genre in the first place is you can't just
Right.
put all of these elements that you recognize from your favorite horror movies together and just hope that they carry weight.
Zombieland, maybe?
Yeah.
Something along that line?
But you have to have some sort of different approach to it or what you're building it up into. So for me, like a syntactical definition of horror would be like horror presents a change or die narrative that depends on an introspective analysis of one's own faults to defeat an external monster, which is typically a mirror of an internal monster.
Wow, that's a thesis.
Yes. So that is my thesis statement. So I guess let's start at the beginning.
Sounds great, though. I mean, I agree.
Change or die narratives. Now, all narratives in their essence are about change.
Yes.
Characters change in the end. It's kind of what's mapped out.
Hero's journey, that kind of thing.
Exactly. Horror is extreme in that it presents this very stark change or die choice.
Got it.
The survivor character in horror movies is usually going to be the one that recognized something about themselves, changed it, and were able to overcome the killer, the ghost, the monster, whatever.
The last girl,
So,
you
the
sometimes
last
call
girl.
them. Yeah. Right.
Exactly. And most of the victims will be people that are kind of stuck who they are or unable to change.
Right. That's why you so often start with a cast that's a group of shitty college kids
Yes.
at this point in their life where they should be changing into better adults, I guess, is kind of the metaphor that they use.
Yeah. And I've always been uncomfortable with the kind of the punishment readings.
Right.
So it's very kind of careful to keep a meta-textual kind of distance from it.
You still want it to be tasteful.
Exactly. You definitely want it to be tasteful. The monsters are, and I say monsters kind of very loosely here,
Right.
because there can definitely be human monsters. There can kind of be, a little more esoteric monsters at times as well.
Environmental.
Environment, exactly. It's a good one. So yeah, the external monster that you're dealing is usually a mirror of something inside that you have to recognize. And it's usually this narrative of recognizing kind of a bad part of yourself. It's a journey into a subconscious to kind of recognize some aspect of psychology or your own self and kind of deal with it, kind of to bring it up into the light and to confront it. And that's usually represented by an external force.
There's no shortage of horror movies that use the external threat as an analogy for things like depression or really your internal fears, of course, mental illnesses, things like that.
Exactly. So yeah, and bringing it back to Midsummer, because I was kind of curious you brought that up.
All right, let's do it.
Exactly. For me, that would totally work with my definition. That's just a story of people that are unable to change.
Totally.
It's the opposite. It's what happens kind of when everyone dies at the end, is that those were characters that were unable to complete their journey and kind of suffer the consequences.
I actually really like that reading as well. And you may be able to get me to agree that it's a horror movie, but I don't know that you'll get me to agree that it's a good horror movie, which we'll kind of talk about a little bit more later. It trips up a couple of the things that I like in my horror movies as well. So I'm actually maybe willing to concede the fact that Midsommar could be seen as horror. It's just not maybe my horror movie. So.
That's true. And when it comes to these kind of split cases, I'm somebody that's going to argue for a syntactical kind of definition. If it's the larger meaning kind of aligns to something horror, if kind of more aligns to my thesis, you can really do it playing with any sort of genre conventions you want. I would find something like Alien or The Thing, classic sci-fi horrors that are really using sci-fi imagery and tropes and characters. But I think they build those up into a horror story.
And I'm actually going to completely agree with you there. And it doesn't run afoul of either of my pillars either, because they're both very obviously trying to scare you, and they use very horrific imagery.
Exactly. So that's always been kind of a fun, different way to kind of look at genre, and especially when you kind of get these cross-genre ones, where are we playing with recognizable elements, or have we built them into something that kind of you can recognize in other genres?
Yeah, can I mention again Zombieland, for example, like just using horror elements but not attempting to make a horror movie kind of thing?
Yeah, sure.
I think that's where you kind of end up on the other end of that.
Exactly. And I think to a counterpoint to that, I think Shaun of the Dead, when it winds up that he just has his best friend kind of chained up and they're going to like keep living, it's funny that they're just like, just stoner burnouts that are kind of zombies, but it's still kind of a freaky thing that they're in such arrested development that it would, not have any difference.
I think you can certainly read it that way. I feel like it was just purely played for laughs. I think maybe they did have some intent in that scene to unsettle you, but it did not unsettle me. So I think it was a little bit of a swing and a miss, but I do agree with the basic idea.
Okay, totally. So that's my definition of a horror movie.
Perfect.
I hope,
all right.
I hope that works. Or I hope that makes sense.
I mean, I think it was great personally, and I think again that's we're gonna keep bringing this up, especially because we're just kind of introducing ourselves to you guys. But big difference between the two definitions there, and something that I think is going to add a lot of fun to the show. So going from there, we're going to use both of our definitions of what we think makes horror good. And from that, we're going to talk about, both of our definitions of what makes a horror movie. And then we are now going on to what we think makes a horror movie good, kind of using those definitions as a framework. So I'm going to start here. What qualities does a good horror movie have? Is kind of what I asked myself as I was thinking about this. And I'm definitely a very opinionated watcher. I have very strong feelings on whether I like movies or not. And usually, right when I finish watching them, I have a pretty good idea of like, okay, either this landed for me or it didn't. There are some things that do merit rewatches, some things that I've been too scared to rewatch, Hereditary, and some others that I just don't have any interest in rewatching. But that aside, my big things. What makes a horror movie good? It has to, first of all, succeed at being scary. So going to my first pillar of it has to be trying to scare me, you have to also close that loop by actually scaring me. And that's going to be probably the most, how do I put this? The most biased of my points, because no one can really decide what scares me except me.
It's a real make or break point too.
It is a make or break point.
It's an all or nothing proposition.
Well, and I think I can usually explain and argue for why something is successfully scary, even past whether it works for me or not.
Sure.
So I think I'm going to argue that I think that's a valid point, even if it's very opinionated based on my tastes. I think also to make a good horror movie, you want to have plenty of dark, intense, or interesting imagery. I say that because I have watched some horror movies in the somewhat modern trend of what's called quiet horror. One of the big ones being It Follows, I think sort of helped codify the genre in a modern way. And It Follows actually did have some good imagery here and there, but some of the more quiet horror I watched was so subdued that you ended up with a movie that certainly was trying to scare you and maybe had some horror themes, but just didn't have enough visually going on to actually get anywhere. So for me, I think you do want to go more all in than holding back when it comes to showing me dark, intense, or interesting imagery. And of course, you can get there with gore and blood and ghosts and whatnot, but it doesn't have to be that. It just has to be something that I'm not going to be seeing in other genres. I think that's what's important for me.
No, that's true. That's a big for any sort of weird fiction. Just to kind of open it up again, it's the things that you are not going to run across in everyday life. It's the completely fantastical.
Yes, exactly.
Is a big seeker of exactly. It's what people seek with these kind of genre works.
And that's actually a big thing for me, just as an audience member, a viewer, a reader in general, is that I tend to really gravitate toward things that probably could not happen in real life. Those are the stories that interest me more than anything, and I love when horror takes those premises and really cranks them up. That's actually why paranormal horror is my favorite subgenre of horror, or supernatural, whatever you'd like to call it. The third thing for me, horror for me really shines when it's taking itself seriously and doesn't tell too many jokes. There's a laugh barometer for me, whereas if I'm laughing too much during a horror movie, then it stops feeling like a good horror movie to me. There's a lot of really fun horror comedy things, Cabin in the Woods being the biggest example of something that I absolutely adore and is not really meant to be super scary. It's kind of my iconic horror comedy film. But then you have things like, I'm going to say it again, Midsommar. I laughed out loud probably a dozen times watching Midsommar. And I don't know how intentional it was, because it was mostly during the very long scenes where the Swedish folk were like dancing and doing silly rituals and stuff. And while it was very in character and made a lot of sense in the narrative, it took me out of the experience because I was no longer feeling tense or getting scared. It was a tonal break for me. So if you want to put it like that, I think being tonally consistent is very, very important in horror. Important in every type of film, but I think especially so in horror.
Especially if you're trying to have that sort of controlled build.
Yes.
That's something that's thrown me off a lot.
Absolutely.
Something that's trying to kind of spoon feed you the rising tension.
Right.
But boy, then they'll drop it once, and as soon as it's dropped or it's broken, you don't just go back to where you were.
Absolutely.
On that rising scale. You kind of broke it. So I think there's certain things when they're trying to absolutely envelop you as with the tone, that'll break it. And I absolutely agree with that.
I mean, so imagine with me for a second if you're watching The Shining, one of the most like slow burn, hypnotic, kind of horror films ever. It's obviously a horror film, but if about halfway through the film, you know, you're getting Jack Nicholson starting to talk to himself, going crazy, seeing ghosts, and then they just like drop in a joke, it's going to completely take you out of that experience. And there's some things you may laugh at The Shining and midway through, but I would bet that you are laughing uncomfortably. You're not actually having fun.
This is true. Jack's got a couple moments when he's
does.
talking to
He
the
does.
ghost bartender
That's
in the
exactly
bathroom.
what I was thinking of. That's the
He's-
exact scene I was thinking
He's
of.
got some Jack looks
He
that
does.
I know meme pretty hard at least.
Jack-
So,
Jack, if you're listening,
we love you. Yeah.
Beautiful. Oh, man, that's incredible.
That's great.
So yeah, and that's another one that's really strong for me in an opinion kind of way is that if you're gonna ask me what makes a really good horror film for me specifically, I don't even want jokes. Don't start out with a funny sort of, you know, motley crew of college kids that you guys are all joking about smoking weed and doing whatever and kill them off. Do still really enjoy those movies, but if we're talking about my ideal horror movie, I want you to be tense and serious. I don't even want any comedy. That's just me though. That's taking that point and taking it to its farthest conclusion.
No, that's true. I think I just cast a much broader net
Yep.
for the genre. I
Right.
guess for me, the comedy stuff, if it's working into some of the subversive parts of it, boy, that's kind of what I'm here for.
And if we talk about something like
I-
Excision,
Yeah.
I know that's pretty much exactly what you're talking about.
Pretty much. Yeah, there's been those I think as you'll soon learn when we get to favorite movies, there's
Yep.
been a new strain of so awkward comedies that kind of get worse and worse until they're
You're
until
just
they're
in
pretty
horror
clear.
territory.
Yeah.
Yeah, right.
And I love those movies to death.
And honestly, me too.
Yeah.
I'm actually going to say that I think Excision is a horror movie, and we
Yep.
will get to that.
Oh yeah.
But that's actually kind of ties into the point a little bit because when I say something that takes itself seriously, it doesn't mean that it has to not have comedy. It just means that it has to also buy into its premise. It's not a movie like something Eli Roth has made that's kind of looking at itself and going, haha, isn't this so stupid? Yeah, laugh with me. I made something stupid.
Oh, yeah.
Excision is doing something where it's showing you comedy, but the whole time it knows what it's doing. It's not laughing at itself.
It's satirical comedy and satirical horror are kind of balanced on that knife's edge, and it just kind of it veers back and forth, or you do as a viewer. Like you can just lean to the right and you're in comedy land, and you lean to the left and you're in horror land.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Uh,
And then you have the unfortunate films that really wanted to be horror and accidentally leaned into comedy land. Anyway, we'll go ahead and we'll leave it at that for now as I move on. A couple more points before I pass it over to Brian.
Yeah.
Tying into what I just said, atmosphere is a big thing for horror movies. I think nailing the atmosphere, part of which is drawing in the audience to your experience, is very, very important for a horror film. I think something like an action movie like Marvel movies, you can get away with not having as much of an atmosphere in your movie. You can have just a bunch of set pieces you move between. But when you do that in horror and you just move from one set piece to another, you get taken out of it almost immediately if they don't have any attention paid to the atmosphere that they're creating as well.
But then, but even in those action adventure movies, the set pieces have to lead one to another.
I mean-
if there's no motivation for Indiana Jones to go city to city, you kind of lose the rousing action adventure spirit a little bit.
Well, and I think that's probably why a lot of these modern Marvel movies don't work for you.
Oh yeah,
Shots fired.
Boom. Okay.
Oh, no. I'm
that's
actually
good.
a big Marvel fan. We're not going to get into that too much. We're both big Marvel fans. We just have opinions, okay? We just have
yeah,
opinions.
that's right.
Nothing too crazy here. I'm going to do two more real quick. One of them is that I think to be a very good horror movie, you want to avoid relying on tropes too much. You want to make sure that you're not being predictable. I think that's an especially big concern for horror. A lot of these, like I said, you can apply to any movie to just make them a good movie, but they are also really applicable, especially to this genre, because part of what I mentioned above of the imagery needing to be there, it can get tropey in this kind of cyclical nature, like I'd mentioned, but you want to avoid overusing it. You want to avoid getting to a place where someone goes, oh yeah, I know exactly when the next jump scare is going to happen. That puts you in a pretty bad spot. You get almost certainly moved to the schlock pile for that.
Yeah, formula can be comfortable, but formula, boy, can be really, really
It can
boring.
be
Yeah.
so boring. And I mean, less so than action movies, but I think being bored in a horror movie is kind of a death knell. I mean, it's almost the opposite of what you want to be happening.
Oh, that's true.
Um,
It's yeah, no, at their heart, it is entertainment.
well,
Movies.
it's also tension and
Oh
excitement for
yeah,
horror. Not necessarily excitement in the same way that an action movie is, but tension, I think I'll say. Um, which boredom can be kind of read as
yeah.
an opposite to tension in a way. So,
I don't think there's many filmmakers that that would not put entertainment first.
right,
In
right,
any one, like gosh, even the most stuffy art house director understands that
yeah.
it's cinema.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Um,
And then the very last thing is just kind of a catch-all. To make it a good horror movie, you also want the qualities of what makes other films good. So you still want good actors, you still want a good script, you want good pacing. Horror movies, listen to me, good pacing, very important, and good visuals. And I'm not going to go into that too much because again, these are the broad strokes that are going to make any film good. But I mention it because there's a lot of really good horror movies that kind of fall flat on one or more of these fronts. You know, those horror movies that you think, wow, this is a really good premise, the visuals are super good, but the acting is just terrible. Or even on the flip side, where you might have a really good cast, you might have a really good script, but the things that you're seeing are just cheap or not scary. So you know, catch all, like I said, just make a good movie. If you're making a horror movie, make sure you know how to make a movie first.
That's true. I was, God, you just reminded me. Sorry, tangent time.
Woo!
I was watching, let me save you for a second.
Go for
Tangent
it.
time. I
Go
was
for it.
watching this interview. It was between John Landis and John Carpenter and David Cronenberg. And they mentioned this one thing where it was back in the day when all of the effects were shitty, all of the actors had to be really good.
Right.
And now, the now being in the 80s when they were doing this interview, and they were like, now all the effects are great and all the acting is terrible.
Oh, that's incredible. Of
Incredible.
course, of course, like Cronenberg and Carpenter say like they're the only ones that are allowed to say that.
Yeah.
In the 80s. Like if it were anybody else in that room, you know, I'd be like, shut up. But yeah, I mean, they
You
really
just reminded me of that real quick.
that is
when the
hilarious.
effects were terrible, like in Doctor Who, man, you really had to step it up to sell that
You
shit.
had to make it work. You had to make it work.
Exactly.
All right, well, I'm gonna go ahead and turn it over to you then. What makes a horror movie good, Bryant?
Okay, well, for me, it's like a lot of the flavor of what it's trying to do is you are taking a journey into the subconscious. Horror is your guide to the underworld. It is Caron guiding you on the river of the dead.
Oh wow,
We are going into your subconscious, so it's kind of about how good of a guide you were on that. What did you show me?
that's a good point.
Right.
I like that.
Exactly. So there's been a lot of these like, and that's I think why I'm little forgiving. Where if you just took me somewhere I've never been before, like bravo, I'm a happy camper.
Okay.
So I think you'll find a lot of my taste is just like the strangest, most unique places I've been to cinematically are the ones that respond the most or that resonate the most with me.
Sure, get the most response from you. Yeah, that makes sense.
Exactly. So yeah, for me, I'm kind of looking for that deeper meaning. I really want you to dig, and kind of getting at what horror does well is that it's also has that subversive element. Is that we're probably getting at those kind of deeper conditions that a lot of other genres or stories don't necessarily want to touch. It's a lot of the grimier, it's the underside of the it's doing your shadow work.
Absolutely. So it's not only making sure it takes you on an interesting journey, but it's taking you on a journey that other movies aren't willing to go on.
Exactly.
Got it.
Which also is kind of the weird appeal of it is
Yeah.
that you've signed up for this thing that's, it's
Unpleasant.
it's kind of unpleasant.
Right.
But do you get catharsis out of it? Is
Oh, yeah.
it kind of a ritual of does it release something from you
Right.
when you go through it? What kind of experience are kind of you having? And for me, I kind of want that journey, and it kind of depends on how good of a guide you were. I don't really care if you leave me in the depths. You know,
Sure.
some movies you just kind of go down into the darkness and you're kind of left in a pit. It's more or less fine.
I kind of
Uh,
like that
I
actually. I know. I'm sure we've talked about this before, but I mean, just so you all are aware as well, viewers, I love horror movies that just don't have any kind of resolution, like happy ending. I love horror movies that you just get the bad end. Everyone dies, or it gets worse, by the end. And it's very hard to pull that off in a way that also feels satisfying. But when it happens, oh man, that is the peak horror movie experience for me.
Yeah, it is, and I think it also really kind of helps define my change or die definition.
Right.
It's the ones that people don't change,
Yep.
and you kind of get left there. It's
That's kind of
when
the
you were
true
exactly
horror movie.
the
Yeah.
true horror movie when you were unable to deal with that thing, you know, that kind of deep psychological scar, and it took over your whole life and kind of, you know.
And interestingly enough, that's actually how Cabin in the Woods ends too. Is they just lose.
Yeah.
Which might be one of the reasons why I like it so much. Now that I've never actually realized that before, but that could be part of it.
Exactly. That also had this weird observer effect where it was,
Right.
yeah,
Right.
you're
Kinda
trying to
draws
do
you
the
in.
ritual, and there's
Right.
a point to the ritual, and they're never going to escape it because it's so important that it just gets carried out.
Yep. Yep. It's true.
So yeah, another quality that I'm looking for is I think sometimes I differentiate between horror versus scary.
Okay.
Scary for me is the kind of immediate what you feel on the tension as you're watching it.
Heart pounding.
Yeah, heart pounding. And that's fun, and I think that's the physical reaction that a lot of people are looking for. But for me, it's that creepy feeling later. It's kind of what's gonna keep me up laying in bed. It's kind of what I wake up thinking about. I want that dreading horror. Scary is this really immediate thing that kind of comes from the movie itself. It's
Sure.
it jumping at you. It's the tension, the hair on the back of your neck.
Sure.
But it's that deeper thought. It's that deeper kind of psychological thought that something was wrong. It showed me something. It showed me some new way to look at something, and it's horrible. And I never saw that in the world before, but now I can't unsee it.
I love that
That-
point actually, because that does kind of build on and take in a different direction. Me wanting the horror movie to be scary. I actually like that a lot. That's a good way to think of it.
Right. So, boy, I think that's mostly for me, man.
Cool.
It needs to meet that flavor.
All right. Well, I think that's pretty much good on our descriptions then. You have both of the definitions from Bryant and I about what makes a horror movie good for us. And so we're going to move on to the final segment of our main section here, which is going to be examples of horror movies that really work for us, that we think are genuinely good horror movies. Again, kind of building on the principles that we've already shared with you guys here today. So I'm going to start off here. And I have a list of about 4 that really codify what I think is amazing about the horror genre. So my first one is Hereditary. If you are a friend of mine, you have heard me talk about Hereditary at some point over the last couple years since it came out. I saw it only once in theater, but it left such a lasting impression on me that despite having the Blu-ray, I have not watched it again. Because it really scared the crap out of me. So already, ding, 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 did great on that front.
I remember seeing that in the theater as well.
Yeah.
Oh my god! I distinctly remember the theater experience almost more than the movie at this point because
Oh, man, when
people jumped,
Dude, okay,
People
spoiler
jumped,
alert,
yeah.
spoiler alert. Anybody who hasn't seen Hereditary, cover your
Yeah.
ears for a couple of seconds. Okay, they covered when the girl's head gets knocked off. Oh my god. I remember people, and it was like a through the entire theater, and that was when I knew, all right, baby, we are doing this. And from then on, the movie never let go, no breaks at all. It's a perfect horror film for me. It's very scary, has amazing imagery. It's shocking without being schlocky. No over-the-top reliance on tropes, even though it does go into kind of a Rosemary's Baby sort of culty thing. It doesn't feel played out to me. They brought it in really organically. And really incredible filmmaking too. I mean, this is a film that looks gorgeous. It's what I've got. It's what started getting people calling Ari Aster And of course I'm blanking on his name right now, but Tenenbaum's what's that?
Oh, Wes
Yeah,
Anderson.
the Wes Anderson of horror, because of just his incredible mastery of cinematography, of color. Um, it's very near a perfect horror movie to me, and everything that I have on this list, with the exception of my very last entry, are going to be kind of what I consider the 10 out of 10s of horror, basically.
He's
The things that I rate the highest for my personal taste.
true. I appreciate the hell out of Ari Aster too. I think
So
he's
good.
so daring in his subject matter and how he pursues it. Nothing is just window dressing. Nothing is just mentioned. Like, if he makes a movie about grief, like, my God, it's really about grief.
Relentless, you might say.
Yeah, exactly. And not in a superficial way at all.
No, it comes off very honest.
yes.
Very honest filmmaker, a very driven filmmaker, and a very talented filmmaker. And it was actually the ridiculously high accolades that I have for Hereditary that I think made Midsommar chafe me a little bit, because it's a very different film. And it's not even really fair of me to have had those expectations necessarily, but it is what it is. Anyway, second film I have on here, Ringu, the original Ring from
Yeah.
Japan, the very first one. Bryant, actually being the kind soul that he is, got me the 4K remaster of the original Ringu for the last Christmas?
Yeah.
For last Christmas.
Yeah.
And let me tell you guys, if you have not seen the original Ring, especially the remaster, Ringu, the Japanese version, it is a fantastic film. Oh man, this is the film that made me finally understand just why the Japanese Ghost Girl stuck around for so long in all the in horror across the East and the West. It has amazing pacing, doles everything out just perfectly along the film. Good kind of, not necessarily mystery because you're not ever wondering what's going on, but a sense of tension, absolutely. Perfect atmosphere and imagery that's so iconic. It had so much staying power that it really helped birth that genre in its entirety.
Totally. And looking back on it, like, I could not believe how well made it was.
So good. So well
Because,
made.
like, man, like at least when I was first watching that kind of era of when J-horror was coming, it was all VHS.
Yeah.
And they were not particularly great transfers. And boy, I don't know about you, but I had just kind of assumed they were cheaper movies.
Oh yeah, well a lot of my
which I think they are, but
Right, exactly. A lot of my first experiences were DVDs as well. Actually, a little bit of an Alex tangent story time. The Grudge 2, I saw it in theaters when I was probably 11. I lied to my mom about which movie I was going to, and me and my friend went and saw The Grudge 2 instead, and it scared the shit out of me. So the Grudge Girl, the Japanese Ghost Girl, and Onryo is what they're called in Japan, is a like deep in my psyche thing that still terrifies me whenever I see it, no matter what. So those movies are kind of cheating for me because there's a lot of Grudge and Ring movies that are god awful, but will still kind of get to me. And it's why I will often still tell people that The Grudge is my favorite horror movie or favorite horror movie franchise. And I'm kind of getting like a distilled, better version of that when I'm bringing up Ringu here. Because classic J-horror, especially with Ringu, has just this iconic staying power that comes from its unsettling imagery and mastery of atmosphere. That's one of the things that J-horror in its prime, and still every now and then, nailed so well, was atmosphere.
absolutely agreed. And like I said, dude, the technical qualifications of those movies was really something that I had kind of ignored until recently, until I kind of started seeing these restorations. But
we watched it together, and we were kind of looking at each other like, this is really good.
Yeah, exactly. And even apart from those two, I think ones that go a little further for me, Pulse and The One Missed Call.
I think we can throw Dark Water in there too.
And Dark Water's a solid one. That's almost a quieter movie as well.
It is, but I think in terms of technical mastery, there, it's a step above The Grudge. Though, again, quick side note: the American Ring was done by Gore Verbinski.
That's true.
So
That's true.
First Pirates, and then also Cure for Wellness. He has a.
I'm not going to argue Naomi Watts either. So.
Sure.
I kind of
Absolutely.
I love Naomi Watts. She's a Lynch actress. So.
I'll go up to bat. For the first Ring
yeah.
in the American version. I think that was perhaps the only American telling of a J horror thing that actually tried to stay close to its roots of like what it meant past just the what you might call window dressing of having a ghost girl in haunted house and stuff is actually pretty good.
Also a good example of PG-13 done right too.
Also true.
Where I do like me a little blood and a little more extreme elements. I like it that I like my horror to be something that society is going to kind of frown upon in a lot of ways.
Right. You want people to go, you like that movie?
Exactly. That's why I'm such a huge Saw fan.
Yeah. That's how he starts every conversation with new people that he meets. He goes, "Hi, I'm
Have you
Brian.
seen Saw? Yeah. Have you seen
Saw is my favorite franchise. What can I do for you today?"
But yeah, no, exactly. I think Ring is definitely one of those movies I think you would see a lot more people lining up for, even if they don't like horror. It could very well be the scariest movie they've ever seen.
Oh, absolutely. Especially that Ringu, because it creeps.
Yeah.
That was one of the really, really good things about that movie is that it's not in your face at all. And at some point you realize that you're kind of like leaning forward a little bit. You're a little freaked out.
It is. It plays with space really well.
Yes.
It suggests space behind its characters. Was kind of something I noticed with its shot construction. There was always a place for something to creep up on the characters from behind.
And I have learned to always watch the backgrounds of movies from being such a big J-horror fan. I actually remember when we were watching the Ringu remaster, and there was just kind of a random scene, and I was like, "Oh, there she is in the back," and we were watching with Bryant and his roommates, and they were like, "Oh, wait, where?" And so we paused it and went back, and happened with the original Grudge as well. There's a lot of seeing the ghosts in the mirrors and passing windows and things like that. That gets picked up by more modern things like Hill House and Bly Manor, which we'll get to a little bit later.
That's true. I know that was one of the huge things about Hill House that everybody really loved.
Well, it's
because you're not going to catch them all. Like you can catch
Pokemon,
some of
folks.
them. Yeah, exactly. But you didn't see every single one.
Nope.
I still get explained some of them where there's reflections from people that aren't casting them and stuff, and you're like, Boy, I would have needed a still and for you to tell me that there's something wrong about this picture to even pick up on that.
Part of the benefit of it being a Netflix series is that you can literally pause and frame by frame go through it if you wanted to. And I think that was in mind, that was kept in mind while they were putting the ghosts in. They knew that people could pour through it if they wanted to.
True.
Anyway, we'll go ahead and move on just so I'm not taking too much time on my segment. The third 10 out of 10 horror movie on my radar, Alien. It has a real threatening fear. There's something about how Alien treats the monster as opposed to how some other movies will treat the monster where you get a very real sense of danger. And it's possibly because you're in a contained environment, that the alien has seemingly no weaknesses. You eventually realize that it can also melt through the goddamn ship. And then at that point, you're like, well, okay, we're really screwed. But it's also that I've said that the perfect horror movie for me takes itself very seriously. Alien is an example that does really well balance its levity with its horror without doing any sort of tonal breaks for me. I feel like it was very smart in how it played its comedy and it played its characters. And it was less for me wanting to get a laugh out of the audience and more doing it for characterization so that when they start dying, you feel that much worse.
Oh yeah, those characters are brilliant.
Yes, exactly.
It's the everyman.
Yep.
For so much, especially of science fiction horror, they're the scientists, they're the military.
Yep.
If they're in space, they're Starfleet Command.
Or I mean, in Alien, couriers. Basically,
yes,
I mean,
but they're average kind of working. They're like truck drivers.
I see what you're saying. It's like the opposite of that.
Exactly.
Got it.
There's none of them that are like super skilled training. There's not like a super genius kind of thing.
There is an android. If you haven't seen Alien 1982 or wherever it came out, one of them's an android. Sorry.
But it also uses its setting very cleverly too. It's the most extreme isolation you can think of.
Yes. In space. Nothing around. Nothing there to hear you scream, as it were.
I had kind of compared it to The Thing earlier of sci-fi movies that are pure horror, and that's something that they both do, is they use the research station or a spaceship as the most extreme isolation you can imagine.
I mean, because what's worse from being trapped in the middle of nowhere with something that's definitely going to kill you? Unless you are Ripley. then you
yeah.
might get away.
Exactly. No, if you're lost in the middle of nowhere, that usually means you're in the woods or in the desert or something. In
true.
space, there's not even air.
No,
like there's
nothing.
literally
We're
nothing.
screwed.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think the really cool thing about Alien for me, also just that it has really good imagery and a good monster as well, is super important.
Set design. My God, that
Set
world is
design's
seamless.
fantastic. I
The
mean-
world is. Oh man.
Yeah, if we're talking about visuals, it's hard to get better than Alien for
Mm-hmm.
that time period. And in no small part because of H.R. Geiger. HG?
Yeah, Giger. Yeah.
I can't remember his second initial, but
HR.
Geiger. It's H.R.
Yeah,
Yeah. H.R. Geiger. Giger.
Human
Absolutely
resources, Geiger.
ridiculously
Yes.
fantastic. Yeah, exactly. Human resources, and that's why they all have to deal with humans and human sexuality, everything
Yes.
that he draws. And I think the big point here being that monster movies can often fall flat for me. But the ones that do hit are the ones where the threatening nature of the monster is the true focus of the film. You can lose me a little bit on monster movies, just in general. It's not necessarily my favorite subgenre. Like I said, I like ghosts, just something about it. I think it's a flavor thing for me. But Alien does this, and I mean, aliens as monsters, you could maybe split hairs there. But Alien, I think, is an example of something that really, really nails that.
It's always been the most pure horror of the franchise to me as well. There's something about Aliens that feels like an action movie.
It's definitely an
But
action.
then I'd have to define the action genre, and I don't really care.
We're
to do.
not
We're not
doing
going to
that.
touch
We're
that.
not going in. All right, my last example before I turn it over to Bryant here. Raw and Excision. And these are the ones that I'm not going to necessarily call them 10 out of 10s. My first three are the right. Exactly. The first three that I mentioned are the pinnacles of horror for me. And these two are horror movies that are offbeat, funky films that end up kind of hard to categorize, but nonetheless leave you feeling dread or discomfort, and really feeling kind of like a solemn, like contemplativeness afterward. And I think this aligns really close with what Bryant was saying about a film that makes you think for a while about a premise that you might not have wanted to think about beforehand. They're both fantastic, really brilliant movies. If you haven't seen them, please go watch them. Quick warning that they are both relatively graphic. Excision, a little bit more so. Excision has no problem playing with stuff that you never want to see. Whereas Raw is more graphic in the traditional sense of, there's some uncomfortable gore. But they're both really, really brilliant. Neither of them are gory or slashing movies. They're very art forward. Yeah.
I love those two movies as well. Those are two of my favorite movies from the past little bit.
Absolutely.
It would probably be on my favorites list, but God, for the one that I really want to talk about that meets this criteria of what makes a horror movie and what does a good one do, for me, it's The Babadook.
Oh, nice.
I mean, I'm going real recent.
I love it. I love it.
Because I'm always inclined to go do something super classic to be like, kind of, this is the originator. But there's something about...
I can't believe we're going to agree on one. That's amazing.
But The Babadook is this modern synthesis of exactly what I'm looking for in these kinds of movies.
Yes.
And to me, it just crushed it.
So good. So good. I will say that was actually a little part I skipped over in my notes was when talking about Hereditary, just that it's a whole section of modern horror masterpieces, and I put Witch and Babadook as well, created a cross of like horror and art film that just sings. It is just incredible. And I'm sorry, I'll hand it back to you,
It's all good. Because for me, it's The Babadook is a complete metaphor.
Yes.
Almost. It's completely about the relationship between the mom and her son, who is completely out of control. And she wants to love her son like a mother-son relationship. It's that family bond. But something has creeped up into it. There is this monster, there's this specter that's in between the two people. And that's what the movie's about. The Babadook is that specter that creeps up between the interpersonal relationships between two people that spoils the whole relationship. It's this kind of ghost that you can't really get around.
Well put.
Thank you. So for me, that's that external monster that's really obviously something that's internal, where she may be battling this ghost, the Babadook, this kind of presence, but what she's really battling is the idea that in her heart of hearts, she really hates her own child.
That kind of nails your principles
Well,
actually in a really cool way.
Yeah.
And I don't mean to gloss over the hating her child part because that's what makes that movie so
so
uncomfortable.
uncomfortable.
If you
Yeah.
have not seen The Babadook, absolutely, again, fantastic film. Please go watch it. This was actually relatively accessible too, in the sense that it's not going to scare people away by being too bloody or
And
too
I
extreme.
don't think there's any blood in it.
I don't. The kid might cut himself once or something.
Okay. But it's not like a bloody movie.
Or no, she does, I think. Anyway, that's not the point. But you're gonna still feel really unsettled when the mom has these outbursts against the child, who admittedly is a piece of shit kid. I mean, I was too. I can say it. I'm allowed. But you have those moments where you're just like, oh man, the mom really shouldn't act that way, right? Like even when the kid is being such a shithead. It's like he's whatever. He's like 6 or something. It's like and the mom just oh man. It's kind of like that side of parenting that no one wants to ever talk about.
Exactly. It's that journey into that subconscious thing that you don't want to touch. It's the cellar. It's the cellar of your mind,
Ooh.
where all of those thoughts that you kind of want to leave there.
Rusty meat hooks.
Yeah, exactly. But you got to go down there.
You do.
Because the spare light bulbs are down there.
I was
So you gotta suck it up and look around the dark basement real quick, and then
Exactly.
you'll find a little light.
Exactly. I like
So
that.
yeah,
I like
no,
that.
for me, the Babadook, it really is the new synthesis of what a perfect horror movie is.
Love it.
She is forced to recognize that bit of herself before that relationship completely destroys her life. And she needs to accept that part of herself, which was kind of the really interesting resolution of it. I don't know if I kind of want to spoil it, but that movie has the most
It's kind of becoming a thing here. So
yeah.
let's just say spoiler alert.
spoilers.
Put your earmuffs on if you don't want to hear the end of Babadook. Skip to like 2 minutes ahead.
Exactly, but they don't confront the ghost. They accept the ghost.
Yep.
And they do literally lock it in the basement.
It's
and
almost like a
that
Shaun of
thing-
the Dead ending without the joke.
Exactly.
Kind of.
Well, yeah, no, they accept it, and now they're forced to live with it. But it's kind of better than it destroying them from the inside out.
Well, and there's no better
so-
option, really. I mean, you always live with grief. It's kind of another movie about grief in the same way Hereditary was. Just this time in the way that grief can come between, a grieving mother and her child, which is a really sad and frightening thing to think about.
Exactly. No, it's not a Lifetime movie.
No, yeah,
it
you're
is not. It is not the most uplifting movie about motherhood you've seen.
You're not watching this at 2 p.m. at your grandma's house. This is, nope.
Yeah. So, yeah, God, I just love that movie.
Nice.
I don't know. Moving on to other favorites, I kind of want to say something for the more comedic horror movies.
Okay.
I know.
Here's where
I know.
you're losing me here.
For me, God, one of my comfort movies, Slither. Slither by James Gunn.
And to be
James
fair,
Gunn of The Guardian.
I've actually not seen it.
From the Guardians of the Galaxy and stuff. He did a really, really funny movie called Slither that has its gross out moments too. That definitely has its moments that'll creep up on you, but it's really populated by just goofy movie characters.
Sure.
There's a lot of great actors kind of just killing weird roles. Nathan Fillion is the town sheriff.
Okay.
Who's kind of doing a gosh golly gee shucks kind of like
That's pretty golden, actually.
yeah, exactly. So he's trying to deal with this alien invasion of weird squid creatures that are kind of taking over the town.
Is this Watchmen?
No, it's yeah. So yeah, no, for me, that's a great example of one that's kind of getting away with both. It's really funny, but it is also kind of actually doing the groundwork and getting the horror done.
I'll withhold
and getting
judgment.
it in there.
Withhold judgment on
Judgment.
that one because I haven't seen it.
It's fun. Again, you may think it's a little toothless, but boy, it's got some moments that are fucking gross.
And next up,
I guess we're
teeth.
swearing
No.
on this. Yeah.
That is actually something I was thinking about as well. Do you all want to hear us say fuck
like-
or not?
Yeah, exactly. I don't
Let
know.
us know in the comments.
I don't know. We're talking about R-rated movies.
We are. It's
Yeah.
probably not a children's podcast, to be honest with
Exactly.
you.
I'm gonna
Please spare us.
regret this turning this on in the car with my mom at some point, I'm sure.
Oh, it's gonna be great.
It's gonna be amazing. I'm gonna
be a
totally
really,
forget all about this.
Really good time.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. When you talk about the Babadook, yeah, that mom fucking
It's-
sucked. And
yeah.
your mom just,
I got some tips about motherhood.
yeah, right. Welcome back to Film Fiends, a parenting podcast.
Oh man. Another more comedic one I want to give a shout out to. Society.
I've never heard of that.
From late 80s, early 90s. I want to say it's like 1990, but it is like so 80s. The premise of it is kid in kind of a rich family realizing that he's adopted and he's getting raised solely for the purpose of being sacrificed to high society.
Oh, you told me about this.
And high society are all these alien creatures that literally feed off the poor.
It's like spooky Men in Black.
Yeah, but God, it has the oddest sense of humor. It's goofy, it's campy, and then it's just vile and disgusting. Like, it really gets gross at the end. But for me, it's a perfect example of when the subversive side meets the horror side. It's making the same point with the horror that it's making with the comedy. And I think you may be able to agree with me on that. It's when the comedy is just meant to break it up or for something different or for a break. It's when it's at the right angle to the kind of the rest of the movie.
Sure.
I feel like there's a way that comedy can reinforce the horror if it's along the same point.
I think I can agree. I think if they're aimed in the same direction, and if you're very careful about what you're using and when you're using it, and your movie comes in waves. If you're specifically not doing a building, mounting tension your entire film, then if you have points of levity throughout the film that are supposed to be there, that's totally fine. My biggest issue is when you have a joke or a moment of levity that just kind of breaks the movie apart. Tone and tonal consistency is so incredibly important to me, and that doesn't mean that you have to have the same tone the whole movie. I don't want everybody speaking in monotone, but there's just some special care you need to give to the tone of your movie if you want it to land as a great horror movie for me.
Yeah, exactly. It's really just the consistency. And to keep the point across, man, if you don't have something that fits, well, you may be sticking somebody in a situation where they're trying to figure out how it fits into your movie.
Right.
And if it was just something random that you threw in there because you liked the pacing, you thought it needed a break, or yeah, it was probably detracting. Right. If it's not adding, it's detracting.
Yeah. Back to our good writing advice, too.
Yeah, exactly. So at this point, my list just kind of turns into favorites.
Why don't you just rabble some off for us? Why don't you just hit me with like a dozen of your favorites? Films?
Okay.
Let's do that.
I think I was talking earlier about kind of the more awkward movies that kind of,
Excision, I know that's on there.
I think May was the first one of those from kind of back in the early 2000s.
Now you're getting a big one from me. If May is the one I'm thinking of, does May have Nicolas Cage?
No, no, it's she's kind of she's the doll girl. She's kind of the awkward girl that has trouble making friends. So she's going to.
There's one recently I feel like was an M name that has Nicolas Cage.
Oh yeah, Mandy.
Mandy, that's what I was thinking of.
Mandy was really cool visually, but there was a part of it that kind of dragged for me.
I'm going on record here, Nicolas Cage. If you're listening right now, I'm very sorry. I really hate Nicolas Cage. I don't like his movies, and I'm sorry, viewers. I'm just very opinionated. I just don't like his face. Okay, I'm sorry. Just don't like his face.
I think Nicolas Cage has a very unique acting style. I think it's like German expressionism, or like an actor like Klaus Kinski or Juliet Messina. But it is definitely its own style. I can see how people don't like it, but I think he is doing something really special and unique. Anyway, this isn't a Nicolas Cage podcast. Boy, May is one of my favorite movies. Its kind of tagline is, if you can't find a friend, make one. Its advice was kind of given to the mother taught her how to make dolls.
Okay.
And stuff. So she's always had this making her own friends kind of
okay.
kind of vibe. So it has that psychological aspect to it where it's kind of dealing with the social alienation and kind of nervousness and anxiety kind of issues. And it just really digs at them in the most uncomfortable way.
Okay.
I'm not exactly sure how much of it I want to give away, but again, spoilers, it turns into making her own perfect friend out of the bits and pieces of the random people in her life.
Oh, we're doing Modern Frankenstein.
So it's pretty much Modern Frankenstein,
Very
where there's
cool.
somebody who she really likes his arms, and there's this person where she really likes his hair, and yada yada. So
Well, now I kind of
she
do
can-
want to see it because that sounds good.
yeah, she can put together the perfect person.
Nice.
So yeah, that kind of gets into that journey into the subconscious that I really like.
Totally.
And it's kind of a descendant of Carrie, which I think
okay.
is way up there for me. It's really hard to say what's number one, but Carrie may be top 3.
Wow.
That's yeah. Again, like
It's
I gotta
big.
go classic for that.
I like it.
Boy, what is there to say about it? I think it's just perfect.
If you haven't seen Carrie,
If you-
or read Carrie, I mean, you probably should.
Yeah.
It's not a long read, and the original film's not that long either. I mean, an hour 30 at most.
And it's just so archetypal when kind of talking about a certain kind of female lead,
Right.
that you kind of see kind of carried over in a lot of more modern things. Even kind of like a Ginger Snaps has a
Carried
lot
over?
of Carrie in it.
Yep.
Yeah. Anyway, Carrie, fucking love it. If you haven't seen it, you got to get to it.
Go check it out.
Night of the Living Dead, another classic that is just
Fantastic.
fantastic.
I mean, really, really good. It's older, so if you're like me and you like your modern effects, your modern sensibilities, your modern adaptations to what it means to do a horror film, you're gonna have to suspend your disbelief a little bit more. I actually only saw the original black and white Night of the Living Dead, I think last year, watching with Bryant here. We were doing spooky movie nights in October,
Yeah.
and fantastic film. But you know, the zombies are kind of just people walking stiffly.
They're
not
the originals.
Very,
I think they're referred
originals.
to as ghouls. I
Yeah,
don't even know
right.
if they have
might-
the zombie word.
Might not even have the Z word yet.
Yeah.
Still very good, but it did. I had to buy in a little bit more than with more modern stuff, and that's not a bad thing. Just be ready for that if you are or have similar sensibilities.
No, it is. But for me, it kind of falls into that the horror versus scary. No, it's definitely probably not going to scare you, especially
Right.
if you're used to the modern movies. But if you kind of take a second, think about what it's saying about society breaking down. I think the horror of that is absolutely still relevant. I think it can still get to people. And I think we're still living through a lot of the issues that Night of the Living Dead's bringing up.
Ugh, unfortunately.
It's a situation that, boy, you should be able to board all the windows of that house up and kind of be able to deal with it. But the people cannot work with each other. They can't agree on simple plans.
Yep.
And they undercut each other and undermine each other.
Yep.
And it dooms everybody.
The ending is also way more relevant than I'm comfortable with currently. Again, spoiler alert, everybody.
Yeah.
The final living character is a black man, and when the cops arrive to rid the house of the zombies, they see the black man in the window, and without making any effort to find out whether he's a zombie or not, they just shoot him and call it a day. Which, as you're watching it, is kind of like, oh, wow, that makes sense back when they're shooting it, but also currently. And I wish it didn't.
Exactly. Yeah, and it really drives the point home that, boy, you gotta watch out for the other people.
Yeah,
The zombies were never as big a deal as everybody else that you were stuck in the room with.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, which is the real horror of it. I think it lasts, and I think if you were to just kind of give it a second, give it some thought, you could really see that it has the ideas behind it have a lot of staying power.
Absolutely.
I think one of my other last favorites, I gotta say, Videodrome. Videodrome is for a horror person, for somebody that's seen a lot. And horror people, we can kind of get to this like, oh, nothing scares me anymore, or
Sure.
like,
Desensitized.
exactly, desensitized a bit. We can kind of be like, yeah, I kind of dare you to scare me, kind of thing. You can't
Right.
scare me anymore. I've seen it all.
Here's martyrs.
Yeah. So what I think you kind of have to do is you then kind of have to raise the stakes and talk about it more like, well, have you ever thought about what watching all of these horror movies is doing to your mind,
Right.
to your mentally, your psychology? And that's kind of what Videodrome does. It's the James Woods. He plays he's on kind of a public service TV station, and he's trying to find stuff to fill his TV channel with, and he finds this pirate signal And it's all scrambled, and it's just snuff films. It is just the most hardcore material, and he becomes completely obsessed with it to the point where it starts changing his own body and it starts getting all Cronenbergy.
Like-
So it's this whole like, yep, the violence that you watch in your entertainment and media slowly changes you. And in a Cronenberg movie, it has a physical dimension of the body horror of actually changing him.
You are what you eat.
Yep.
I mean, I love it. I love it.
Uh,
Cronenberg is the master of that kind of stuff too. I mean, his stuff's always going to be physically unsettling. You're gonna get some nice body horror.
And he's very aware of the observer effect
Yep.
too. Of it really raises the stakes and makes you think about yourself actually watching this stuff too. As a fan, because you can really easily put yourself in the James Woods situation. Because you are also the person seeking out all of these most awful things to watch all of the time.
I do that.
Exactly. So it's a nice little psychological trick to kind of mess with a long-time horror fan.
Sure.
Exactly.
No,
definitely
good stuff.
one of my favorites.
Yeah,
So
that's good. all good stuff. All good stuff.
exactly.
So yeah, I think that kind of wraps up that section for us.
I think so.
And with that, actually, that's kind of the end of our main topic as well. So that was what makes a horror movie good. We went over what makes a horror movie for us, what our personal opinions are of how to make a good movie using those principles, and then some examples of the movies that have been most effective for us in one way or another, kind of all tying that together. So we're going to move on to our second recurring segment of the podcast. This one is going to be called I Know What You Saw Last Summer.
Bum, bum.
The joke here being that basically we're going to talk about things that we've watched recently that we don't necessarily need to devote a whole episode to, but just to kind of keep up on the fun horror things that have made it onto our TV.
Absolutely. No, like I've said, I'm always just trying to watch stuff all the time.
Right.
Especially lately, it's been all horror movies. So,
You should see his film journal. I mean, 200? You passed 200?
yes, I passed 200 earlier
Nuts.
this month.
Nuts.
That's on the year 2020.
Love it. Love it. That's only the things he decided to start writing about. So
Yes.
he's got a lot. He's got a lot going here.
But yeah, I want to say the one I saw in the last week that really stood out to me was The Loved Ones from Sean Byrne out of Australia. Mentioned a lot of Australian movies here today,
do
kind
be
of with the
liking the
Babadook.
Australian
Yeah,
folks.
exactly. But yeah, another one of those. God, I don't even know how to describe it or what I liked so much about it. It had that high school element. It had that kind of disaffected, kind of loner protagonist. Kind of similar to that tortured protagonist of like a Carrie or May.
Sure.
So that could have been why I responded so heavily to it, is it kind of had a lot of the same echoes of those older movies that I liked.
Yeah, totally. And I mean, it has also no shortage of messed up things happening in it as well to kind of put the cherry on top.
Sure. Imagery was spot on. Just
Juxtaposition there was nice. I think that was actually
Yes.
maybe the name of the game for Loved Ones is juxtaposition, because it's taking this like almost sickly sweet high school relationship and then doing the horror thing of course the one of the people involved in the relationship is taking it a step, 2 steps, 3 steps too far, but then it actually goes even past that conclusion when the girl's dad gets involved, and then it starts getting real weird.
It is. And there was also another odd thing about it was the B storyline had like nothing horror about it.
Sure.
There's like the main character has this awful prom night experience where he's held hostage by this girl that he turned down to the prom.
Right.
But she's going to have her perfect night anyways, kind of thing. Anyway, his friend asks out the goth girl of the school, and they have this ridiculous prom night like any other kind of high school movie.
Right.
It juxtaposes really contrasting with the actual kind of horror and torture situation of the other friend, though. Which was kind of weird when I saw it. I wasn't exactly sure what the point of that was.
I will say that I think maybe that going out on a limb here might be the weakest aspect of the movie. I think if we're saying that, in my opinion, like the crux of the film is the juxtaposition, I think that might have been one step too far in that direction. If the the director or the creative, team, if their whole point was to make those two really diametrically opposed storylines or scenes. I just don't know if that was really maybe necessary. You already get a lot of that when you have the main kid tied to the chair in a tuxedo as the girl's like putting, I want to say she puts like party hats on them or something at one
Yeah.
point. Yeah, it's like it's already you're watching it and it's dissonant enough without having to have that second group of characters.
Yeah, and I think you have a lot of the differences of the main kid and the girl too.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, they're pretty opposed. Yeah.
Yeah, he's going through the trauma of his dad dying.
Right.
And stuff. So he has his own kind of stuff that he's trying to work through. And so is she, but there is this, it's so different how they just go about trying to fix themselves and how they deal with their own mental health issues.
Yep.
It's, actually, now I'm kind of talking through it. It's kind of about two very different people kind of trying to work through their own mental health issues and the collision that results.
And one gets violent.
Exactly. So that was The Loved Ones for me. What have you seen recently that was good?
Yeah, so I admittedly have been super, super busy lately. Still working, doing a full day job, and then in a lot of my spare time, actually been setting up the socials for Film Fiends and trying to get all of the logistics worked out. But in between that, actually recently found out with the release of Bly Manor that my girlfriend had not seen Haunting of Hill House.
Oh.
So we watched the first 5 episodes together over the weekend. There's a total of 8, so we didn't quite get through it. But watching it again, Hill House, I should make a quick pause here to note that we're not going to talk about a ton of TV shows on here because my dear friend Bryant here, not as big into the TV series as the movie format. He's a big film.
I will say I did just finish Lovecraft Country.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, talking about stuff we just recently saw. The finale of Lovecraft Country was a couple days ago. Yeah.
You know what? Wow.
That was solid. That was solid.
Talk about putting my foot in my mouth. Man.
No, you are absolutely right, though. No, because he's the guy, like, I swear I would love to watch a horror series, but they just don't land for me.
Right.
I am so sorry, American Horror Story. But
well,
Mm-hmm.
that's actually, bring that up. That's super interesting. I did watch all 3 of the first seasons all the way through. That was through Coven. The 4th one was the circus one, I think, which I was not super into. The 5th one was Hotel, which I watched all the way through. Coincidentally, features my favorite actress, Alexandra Daddario. If you're listening, hit us up. Okay. And then, have not watched 6 or 7. I watched a little bit of 6. That was one that was very topical. Had a lot of Trump stuff going on. It was a little on the nose, I'll say that much. But anyway, going into stuff that we've watched recently, I have been watching a lot. I love TV series. For me, I think they're an amazing format. I think they give you a lot of room to tell longer and more complex stories. I think movies obviously are fantastic and they have their place, but they're also the strongest for me when they're completely self-contained, which means that you fundamentally have a shorter timeline that you can tell a good movie in. And when there's a story that demands a longer timeline from you, for me, I would rather have a TV series that is more laid back and willing to explore those avenues than doing like a trilogy. But that also gets into some issues of like, because film production takes so long and you have a trilogy, you might be working with different directors. You might be working with different investors along the way. You might have more money wrapped in, which means that it gets more commercial, things like that. I mean, it's all, all kind of part of the pie there. But point being, Hill House is a very, very strong horror series. And in rewatching it, the biggest thing that I can say about it is that its strength is actually not necessarily in its imagery, but in its characters. It has very, very well written character stories, and you could take out the horror element completely, and it would actually still be a really good, really interesting character study. And that's kind of almost what they do with like a part of the story, making you wonder like, oh, how much of this ghost stuff really did happen. The main actor, the main kid who's like the star of the first episode, his whole thing is that now he writes true confessional horror stories because he doesn't believe in ghosts. So he goes around and like collects people's ghost stories. And it's a really cool commentary, I think, on the series as a whole of like the first character you're being introduced to doesn't even really believe in the whole thing. So should you? Um,
No,
yeah.
that's true. I think the characters in Hill House. I admittedly didn't watch the whole thing, but the characters in Hill House was definitely. I felt like, yes, okay, I can finally see that this is a horror story that can fill up 8 hours.
Right.
Because it's kind of hard. You have a genre where kind of it's about the characters getting picked off one by one, and
Terse is a word that comes to mind when you're doing horror
yeah.
stuff.
So how do you last? How do you last a season like
Absolutely.
that?
Absolutely. No,
Yeah.
it's difficult. And as much as I love the serial format, I mean, I agree. In terms of horror, especially, it's keeping that interest and keeping that tension, especially, is very difficult. I think Hill House did it very, very well. Hill House had a couple of twists that were fantastic. And when it does use its horror imagery, it's relatively effective. I'm not going to say it hits every time, but you also do kind of get the feeling that it's not really the point, you know? So fun in that way. It's a little bit like to the side of what I would normally enjoy, but I think it does enough good that it really drew me in and made me a fan. And so Bly Manor, I actually found out about a little bit late. I hadn't realized that it had dropped until my friends had started talking about it a week or two ago, and only got around to it a couple of days ago. And so very interesting. They're actually doing an American Horror Story style thing here where it's a lot of returning actors and actresses doing a completely different story, recast, accents and all, which is a big pet peeve of mine. If you cannot do a good accent, do not play the role. I'm not going to say any names or point out any particular people in this one because there's no one that's really, really egregious. But especially after coming like directly off the back of Hill House, there's one character, for example, who I'm not actually sure of his nationality in real life. So if he's Irish, I apologize. But his Irish accent in Bly Manor was kind of immediately like, oh, that sounds a little weird. Anyway, still a very, very fun, very interesting series. I'm on episode 4 out of 9 this time, which I thought was very interesting. A 9-episode season. I don't think I've ever heard of that before.
That is one of my kind of favorite parts about streaming sometimes.
Yeah,
Is
you can
I
just
like
do your
I
thing.
like variable episode lengths.
Yeah, totally.
I think that's been
An hour versus 50 minutes. You could do it. Like, you can just in the same series.
Oh yeah, exactly, and
Super
not
nice.
having to program your show to have a commercial break.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh my god.
Industry professionals, please.
Yeah.
Please let us just write something without having commercial breaks.
Breaks.
I know you need the money. I know.
Yes.
But man, that is crazy. When I learned about writing for TV, how you have to write those in, very difficult.
Yeah.
So yeah, both really fun series, really interesting, definitely worth a watch. They're not super scary, so if you're just getting into horror, they're a really, really good way to get into it. Though I think that Hill House is the scarier of the two, and if you're just getting into them, Hill House might have a couple moments that do get you. Lastly, I did just watch Ju-on, the series on Netflix. It's called Ju-on Origins. So it's the prequel, basically, to The Grudge, which the Japanese for the name for The Grudge being Ju-on. And it's 6 episodes. They're only 30-minute episodes, actually, so
Yeah.
it's relatively short. You can get through it in one sitting. And it was very interesting. I think they did a lot of things right. I'm unsure as to why it's called Origins because looking at the story of the rest of the franchise, it actually has nothing to do with Kayako or Toshio, as far as I can tell. But it's a very interesting, like, happens before the rest of the stuff kind of Grudge story in the same house and everything. So maybe it's just trying to hammer the point home of like, there's been a lot of horrible stuff that's happened in this house, and that's why it's like super haunted. And that's when you get into Grudge 2 American territory of like the haunting is spreading out through the rest of the world and it gets like nutso craziness. Maybe they're trying to drive that home of like, that's why this house is so haunted, not just because of Kayako, but also because of all of the other various horrible
More
things.
residual ghost energy.
Right, yeah,
More
right,
resi-
exactly. The ectoplasm is positively caked
Yes.
onto the walls here. But honestly, as a fan of those franchises, it was very good, very entertaining. Not without its faults, but I think definitely if you're a fan of The Grudge or The Ring, it's worth checking out.
Fantastic. I know I did an episode or two of that, so I may finish that out.
I would recommend it. I would recommend it. Okay, cool. So I think we're about wrapping up here. We're going to do one last little segment here, and that's just we're releasing this on Halloween. So we wanted to talk a little bit about Halloween, kind of our traditions and things that we might maybe recommend to watch, or
Yeah.
let's talk about Halloween. What do you think, Brian? You got anything for us?
Well, I have an inkling that you may be as big of a fan of watching horror movies on Halloween as I am.
You know,
I think you may be.
You know, it's definitely something that I partake in here and there.
So for me, it's kind of like, boy, am I watching it kind of more by myself or with some experienced horror fans, or do I have to like
Are you
kind of please a
entertaining?
room?
Right,
Yeah.
right. I like
so
that.
gosh, boy, when I'm trying to please a room, I gotta tell you, the one I go for now is Trick or Treat.
Oh yeah, I mean it's in the name, folks.
Yeah, exactly. Boy, I think they really nailed it on that one. That was kind of a Halloween movie to end all Halloween movies.
Sure.
I love the anthology version of it. Cause boy, everyone can be kind of chilling. Everyone can be partying. You can kind of lose a story and come back in the next one.
Sure.
It hits a lot of great tropes.
Yeah, totally.
God, it hits, so many just classic, iconic horror things. You hit in Trick or Treat, so
Love it. I love it.
yeah, exactly. No, it's just your great mixed bag for you.
Totally.
Just like something that kind of hits all the notes.
I will say, if we're talking about a horror movie to put on, this one I'll put on whether I'm pleasing a crowd, whether I go to horror veterans, or whether I'm watching it by myself. It's recently become a tradition of mine, thanks to my lovely friend Bryant, actually, Return of the Living Dead. So this movie, if you're not familiar with it, of course, you've definitely heard the name before, the tropes of the name. It's a Living Dead movie, right? It's a zombie movie. This one was made in the 80s, and it's very, it's like purposely kind of a comedy, but it's also more than that. It's a very funny, but still very spooky, and overall just very entertaining film. The first time I watched it, I remember I was laughing so hard. It was so entertaining. But it also has a nobody wins ending that's like totally the opposite of what you'd expect from a comedy movie like that. Things just get worse and worse and worse, and you can't even really call it a funny zombie movie, really. It is, if you're going to get, split hairs here, but take it from the guy who said I like my horror without comedy to then tell you this is the Halloween movie, folks. This movie is perfect to have a couple beers with, not take too seriously, and just enjoy yourself. I really, really like it.
It is. It's a total classic. And I think we kind of hit on it. It can be really difficult to explain the appeal of a movie like that.
Right.
Because again, it kind of has that 80s campiness.
Right.
I know about halfway through the movie, it introduces a group of punk rockers who are some of the questionable acting.
My favorite
Yes.
part of that movie. Oh my gosh, they're so good. There's also
It's riotously funny. It's
for-
gross. The effects actually are great.
effects are really good. It's the first movie to have a zombie go brain.
Exactly.
So it started that whole thing. There's girls getting naked, so be aware of that as you're watching it. If a thumbs up, thumbs down kind of thing for you. But it really comes together to just make this incredibly entertaining film that I think is perfect for Halloween. I don't think you don't want to watch Hereditary on Halloween. I mean, you don't want something that's really going to hit you and leave you sitting there like, oh man, reevaluating your life. You do want something a little bit fun, a little bit uplifting. And Return of the Living Dead is absolutely that. And just like Trick or Treat, you can kind of come in and out of it. You don't really have to watch the whole thing. You could pop out when the punks get there and pop back in when they're trying to cremate one of the zombies, and you'll be fine.
Yeah, exactly. No, that movie's just riotously
It's
fun.
so
Like you
fun.
said,
It
like
is so
sometimes
fun.
when you get a room of people and a couple beers in, it can be hard to throw on something that's gonna hypnotize the whole crowd.
You're
and
not putting on The Shining.
so exactly. Return of the Living Dead is a blast. It's
Yep.
80s gold.
Absolutely. And yeah, so just in terms of Halloween stuff, I mean, unfortunately, we're a little bit old to trick or treat, but if you're still doing that, go get yourself some candy, go have fun. If you're a little bit older, have yourself a couple of beers, couple of cocktails, whatever you like. I bought Halloween decorations for the first time this year.
Exactly.
So I'm gonna be putting those up. By the time this airs, they'll be in full swing.
I made sure to do a jack-o'-lantern actually. Just I'm not expecting any trick-or-treaters, but I thought, you got to
Right.
keep that tradition up sometimes.
Absolutely.
So I
Absolutely.
did the Scream mask, the Ghostface killer.
And in
I think it
fact, you
turned
may
out.
be able to see that on our
So
Instagram.
damn,
So go ahead and give that
I think
a
I'll throw that on the
yeah,
Instagram.
give that a look. It may actually, by the time you hear this, it may already be
It'd
up.
probably be already be up there.
Yeah, so throw us a comment. See what let us see your jack-o'-lanterns. And tell us what you think. So, Halloween 2020, looking a little bit different than the other years. But from us here at Film Fiends, we just want to let you guys know it's still possible to have fun. And whether you are Zooming in with your friends or whether you're safely distanced outside or in a living room, throw on Trick or Treat, throw on Return of the Living Dead, have yourself a couple of beers or some candy if that's your preference. And don't let it stop you from carving some pumpkins.
Exactly.
All right,
Exactly.
and I think with that, we are just about
What about
out.
that? I think so. Do we want to talk about next episode real quick?
Yeah, real quick.
Quick.
So you may have caught it in a spoiler alert
Alerts,
that
yes.
we did earlier in the episode.
Good.
Our next episode here on Film Freaks is going to be Scream Queens.
Ooh yeah, everyone's favorite.
Yes, we're going to be talking about this trope in horror. What is a Scream Queen? What does that mean? The iconic female characters in the horror genre.
Exactly. It's a huge part of horror culture. Most movies wouldn't even exist without the character. So
Absolutely.
exactly.
Absolutely. Is it just a last girl or is it something more?
Exactly. I think I have a wider definition than you do.
We're going to look into it.
So,
Alrighty. Well, thank you everybody for joining us tonight at Film Fiends. I hope you have a wonderful Halloween. This is Alex signing off.
this is Bryant. Thank you for listening.